Imagine being a young sailor, barely out of your teens, thrown into the heart of the most dangerous waters in the world. The storm is raging, enemy submarines are lurking, and you're standing on the deck of a merchant ship with nothing but your crew and a single gun to defend yourself. This was the reality for thousands of U.S. Naval Armed Guard sailors during World War II. In this video, we'll take you through their harrowing journey of bravery, sacrifice, and survival. Stay with us until the end to uncover the untold stories of these unsung heroes and how their courage helped shape history. In the vast and dangerous waters of the Atlantic during World War II, the skies were often dark, not just from the looming storms, but from the ever-present threat of German U-boats. These submarines, silent predators of the sea, posed a deadly menace to the merchant ships carrying vital supplies to the front lines. While battleships and fighter planes received much of the glory during the war, there was another group of men whose bravery has gone largely unrecognized, the U.S. Naval Armed Guard. These men didn't serve on the sleek destroyers or mighty aircraft carriers. Instead, they were assigned to protect America's merchant fleet. Slow, lumbering ships that transported weapons, food, and fuel. Often referred to as fish food by their comrades in the Navy, their task was thankless and perilous. These ships were frequent targets with little ability to outrun or outgun the enemy. Yet, the men of the armed guard took their posts without hesitation. One such man was Cadet Edwin O'Hara, a member of the armed guard aboard the SS Stephen Hopkins. In September 1942, while crossing the South Atlantic, the Stephen Hopkins was ambushed by the heavily armed German raider, Steer. The Stephen Hopkins was not a warship, but it was far from defenseless. On deck stood a single 4-inch gun and a handful of men ready to defend their vessel. The battle was fierce. The Steer pummeled the Stephen Hopkins with shells, killing many of the armed guard crew members. Despite the overwhelming odds, young Edwin O'Hara refused to abandon his post. When the gunners were killed, O'Hara took control of the gun, single-handedly loading and firing. 5 shots echoed across the ocean, and while the Stephen Hopkins was eventually sunk, those 5 shots critically damaged the Steer, leading to its eventual destruction as well. O'Hara's sacrifice that day exemplified the spirit of the Naval Armed Guard. These men were not professional soldiers seeking glory on the battlefield. They were everyday Americans, farmers, factory workers, and students who understood the importance of their mission. Without the supplies they protected, the war effort would have crumbled. Yet, their heroism often went unnoticed. In the early days of the war, the Naval Armed Guard was poorly equipped. Some ships carried weapons that dated back to World War I, relics from an earlier time, ineffective against modern enemy aircraft and submarines. Training was rushed, and many of these men had little idea of what awaited them when they set sail into hostile waters. Inexperienced, underprepared, and sometimes underappreciated, they faced both the enemy and the treacherous conditions of the sea. The hardships were immense. The North Atlantic in particular was a deadly environment. In 1942, the infamous PQ-17 convoy, tasked with delivering supplies to the Soviet Union, encountered one of the most brutal U-boat assaults in history. The men of the armed guard aboard those merchant ships were not just battling German torpedoes. They were fighting against the elements. Gale-force winds whipped across the decks, waves crashed with relentless force, and the bitter cold seeped into their bones. One sailor recalled that even when there were no enemies in sight, it felt like the ocean itself was trying to tear them apart. But through sheer will and determination, the armed guard adapted. They became more than just defenders. They became experts in their craft. Over time, the Navy recognized the importance of their mission and began providing better training, more modern weapons, and greater support. By the end of the war, the Naval Armed Guard had shot down countless enemy planes and repelled numerous attacks. They had saved not just ships, but entire convoys, ensuring that the supplies needed to win the war reached their destinations. Though they received little recognition at the time, the legacy of the Naval Armed Guard is undeniable. Without their bravery, the supply lines that were the lifeblood of the Allied war effort could have collapsed. Their contribution may not have been glamorous, but it was critical. Today we honor these men, not because they sought fame or medals, but because they understood the value of duty. Their courage under fire, their resilience in the face of overwhelming odds, and their quiet determination to see the mission through to the end are what make them true heroes. They are a reminder that sometimes the most vital roles are played by those who stand in the shadows, without fanfare, simply doing what needs to be done.